Hi, this is Andy. Today on this episode, we're gonna talk about communication, and I'm excited to introduce you to today's guest, Michael. Okay, no, I just can't continue like that. But here's the deal: I think it's fair to say all of us listening, all of us have sat through that meeting where the person who was speaking was essentially communicating like that. Maybe their content was solid, but oh my goodness, the delivery was like a dense fog that made it difficult to cut through to even understand their message. And most of us don't make a living by speaking. That's for people who are professional speakers. But let me say this, if you're thinking that, I'd like to challenge that notion. You do make a living by speaking. Every time you're in the presence of another human, whether at work or beyond, we're communicating. And today I'm excited to introduce you to one of the best books I've read that can help you level up how you deliver your message. Michael Chad Hoeppner joins us today to talk about his new book, Don't Say How to Communicate Effectively to Live a Better Life. And I got to tell you, I love that title because it's actually a trick. You'll learn today why Michael's not big on advice that starts with the word don't. And the subtitle makes it clear that as we get better at communication, it has these virtuous benefits in life, not just at work. In today's discussion, you'll learn why there's no such thing as public speaking. There's just speaking. You'll learn how to recognize so much of the unhelpful advice that's often dished out about this important topic. And moreover, you're going to learn one of the best definitions I've ever heard of what good communication actually is. And you'll be introduced to just a few of the drills and exercises included in Michael's book. If you'd like to be a more confident, more effective communicator at work and at home, I consider this book a must read, and I can't wait to share the discussion with you. Hey, quick note, I want to invite you to join our Lead 52 family. It's a group of global leaders who are committed to transforming our ability to lead and deliver. It's 52 weeks of leadership learning delivered right to your inbox, taking less than 5 minutes a week, and it's all for free. Learn more and sign up at getlead52.com. Thanks. Let's jump into our discussion with Michael today about his new book, Don't Say So, Michael, thank you for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hey, we'll get the ideas from your book in just a bit, but I'd like to learn a little bit more about you first. Was there anything in your family culture growing up or early experiences that shaped how you think about communication, or maybe even indicated that someday you'd be one of the most sought out communication coaches?
Yeah, it's a very unconventional story, actually.
Mm,
Both my mother and father were professional. Well, my mom still is, but my
mm,
father, who's passed, he was, and she still is a professional cellist. And combined, they have more than a century of experience playing in the Colorado Symphony Orchestra. My
mm.
mom is going on her 63rd year. Congrats, mom, by the way.
Wow.
But the reason to say that whole story is actually my dad was a very, very talented and effective and beloved cello teacher.
Mm.
So growing up, I would hear him every day, hours a day from his study, teaching kids how to play the cello. Now, that might sound like, "Where are you going with this? You teach people how to speak." But it was very interesting to hear how he was trying to help people be more expressive as musicians. And as maybe we'll get into in this discussion, everybody listening, you are more like a cello than you actually know right now.
Mm.
So as a teaser, we'll get into that, I promise. But listening to my dad was one of the formative experiences about how I think about helping people learn anything. And one of those things is certainly speaking.
I love that. Yeah, I love that. I think it might be easy for people to think, well, I don't need a book about presenting because I'm not a speaker. I don't make presentations. Yet you say in the book that speaking is not a sidecar to being human. So, what do you mean by that? And why is this book really for all of us?
Yeah, it's a huge trap to think, I don't present that much. I don't give TED Talks. It's a trap, first of all, because if you're not really honest with yourself about that, you may in fact be limiting your life, your
Mm.
career, your potential a bunch because you've essentially said, I'm not in that category, and therefore I'm also not going to seek out opportunities that could change that category. So that's
Right.
the first part. But the second part is that we are all public speakers all
Mm.
the time. And it's not a sidecar to being human because one of the ways in which we are distinct from other species is this miraculous, almost architecture of communication that we have built around ourselves. If you
Mm.
read folks who look at how language has developed, one of the biggest things that distinguishes us from other species is that we can use incredibly ornate, complex, amazing words to help share stories, to help share myths, to help motivate people to team up together to do stuff. So, this is part of what literally allowed us and allows us to succeed on planet Earth. So, the idea that you are not part of that clan, if you're listening to this podcast or watching this podcast, it is absurd. You are. So the choice is, do you choose to take advantage of this miraculous ability that you have, or do you limit your idea of what that is and therefore put yourself in a box?
Yeah, I'm thinking of examples in the book where you had a coaching client who, no question about her intelligence, her capabilities, but didn't interview well. You don't think of interview typically as public speaking, but if it's anything, right, it is speaking. And there's just an endless number of situations. When I was dating my wife, when she's going through a difficult time, I have my best friend on this earth just got diagnosed with cancer. So when you had the exercise in the book of how do you communicate when someone tells you something, it was so clear to me what you were saying there. We're doing this all the time, right, Michael?
Yeah. Everybody listening, I'll give you a test about this. All right. I promise you right now, you have some totally arbitrary distinction in your mind about what constitutes public speaking and what does not.
Yeah.
And very likely one of the simplest ones is you have some mythical number in your mind. Talking to four people is just a small group, but talking to five becomes public speaking. Or
Mm.
maybe it's 14 to 15, or maybe it's 29 to 30. It's absurd. Others of you probably think if I'm standing up and I have a microphone, well, then I'm public speaking. But if I'm just sitting down talking to one person, then I'm not public speaking. Anytime you're speaking, by definition, it is in a way public speaking. I mean, I joke oftentimes, if you want to get better at this, the next time you're ordering coffee, take a step back by 6 inches, nothing that is obnoxious or noticeable to the others around you, all right? And then consider that you are, in fact, public speaking, both to the barista, the person behind the counter, and also your fellow humans around you, because you're making words and sound surrounded by other people. And the point there is embrace all these opportunities we all have all day long to get better at turning air into sound and sound into words.
Yeah, I love that. I'd love to start with the Hall of Fame of terrible advice, straight from what you call the General Don't School of Coaching.
Yeah.
What are some examples of common speaking advice that either doesn't work, or I think what I took from your book might even make things worse? And why doesn't it work?
Yeah. So you previewed this. You said the General Don't School of Coaching. And the reason I named it that is because a lot of communication advice that people get, and a lot of coaching even,
Mhm.
fits in this idea of a don't, which activates thought suppression. I'll tell you what that is in a second, and a totally generalized suggestion. So the most absurd one is like, hey, listen, Andy, on your podcast, like, just don't be nervous, just be yourself.
Just be yourself.
Don't
Just
be
have
nervous.
fun.
Don't be nervous, just be yourself.
Just relax.
Yeah, don't be nervous. Just be yourself. So as soon as I say don't be, which is why you rightly mentioned the title of the book as a trick. As
Mhm.
soon as I say to you, don't be, your brain is getting prepared to distinguish whatever comes next from the rest of the known universe.
Mhm.
Because it has to think about that thing so it can categorize it in order to compare that thing against everything else in the world. So you are mandating your brain to
Mhm.
fixate on the thing you're not supposed to do. That fits for don't make distracting hand gestures, don't be nervous, don't come across as too salesy, don't. Okay, but then the antidote to this is supposedly something that's really easy to implement, but it's not at all. It's totally general. Just be yourself. Relax. Just own the room. Just be comfortable. Just take your time. Just breathe.
Yeah.
So, in fact, if you ever hear advice, and this is not just in communicating, by the way, if you ever get advice from anyone that features the words don't and just in a single sentence, it's a very good possibility that you should run away from that advice as fast as you possibly can. Now, here's why it's kind of humorous on the one hand, because we can all hear how absurd it is.
Right.
But here's the real tragedy. It's not humorous at all. A lot of people get that coaching and it makes them worse. And the reason it makes them worse, and what is so dispiriting and fatiguing, and for some people, honestly paralyzing, is that then all you think about is how bad you are. And it only reinforces all the wrong stories that you already have in your own head about yourself. So when you get the like, don't be nervous, just relax, or don't be nervous, just be yourself. When you fail to do that in the next meeting, because you're going to fail because the advice is worthless, after the meeting, all it does is reinforce the same idea of like, God, I'm just so not authentic. I'm just not myself. I really should just be more myself more. And I got nervous again. I couldn't succeed. But who is the subject of that critique? You, and how nervous you were and how not yourself you were. But in communication, the only barometer of if we were successful or not is not you and how you felt and if you were yourself that day or not, or if you were nervous. The only barometer is, did I reach the other person? So all of this general don't thought suppression advice, the biggest problem is that it just fixates you more on you.
Which really I think is a good lead in to what your definition of what good communication is. Right? Because I've never heard a definition that was just so actionable and memorable as what you have. So what is good communication, Michael?
Yeah. Good communication is you. It's not me. It's not some mythical, exceptional communicator. It's not even you, Andy, by the way. And you're a very good communicator.
Thank
It is whoever is listening to this right now, whoever is listening to this anywhere, but you, when you are at your most other focused. So when you are earnestly trying to reach the person or people you're speaking to.
It's so brilliant because when I think of presentation skills over the years. Do this with your hands, and so I'm trying to think of what to do with my hands. But you talk about when I'm at a restaurant with my wife, I'm not worried about what am I doing with my hands, or we're watching a movie with a friend. I'm not thinking about that. I'm thinking about something external, and so it's others focused. It just feels so much. It feels freeing, I suppose, right?
It should feel freeing because people, you already know how to do this.
Yeah.
You do. You've been doing it your whole life. And sometimes you do it really well, and other times not quite so well, but you've been doing it forever and ever. Now, you just mentioned your hands.
Mhm.
But all the behaviors that we get that bad reductive coaching about, the general don't coaching about, those behaviors are not something that is shellacked onto the outside of us. So you'll get that coaching, like use decisive gestures to emphasize key points, or keep your gestures in a safe zone, or
Right.
come back to a home base. Now, I'm ridiculing those, of course, with my voice, but let me be clear, those are slightly better than general don't. Because at
Mhm.
least they're actionable. At least you could watch a video later on and say, oh, okay, well, I did keep my hands in a safe zone, or I did go back to a home base. But the problem, even there, is that they're very reductive rules or guidelines about something that is utterly organic.
Mhm.
All of the behaviors of communication, eye contact, enunciation, vocal variety, and yes, gestures, don't come from a bunch of guidelines or rules. They come from the human communication animal needing to use all of its resources
Yeah.
to communicate a message and then test and see if the message was actually received. So if you, the royal you, have received coaching of like only use gestures to make emphatic points and never distract your audience with gestures, but only use them in a limited way. And of course, I'm putting on kind of like a cliche bad newscaster voice for that. Gently poke fun at it. Consider your gestures are not there to make emphatic points. Your gestures are there because in that moment, your body needs something besides just your words to try to get your ideas across. So if you have a bunch of limiting ideas about what gestures are, yes, please unleash your hands and gesture with freedom and ease, is what I call it, to make your points.
Over the years, I've asked executives When you're working or preparing for your presentation, what do you focus on primarily? Content or delivery? And it's not going to surprise you because I read your book. Overwhelmingly, the answer is content. And your focus is so much more on delivery. Why is it so important for us to focus on delivery?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you the answers that we all know, all right? And then I'll give you a bunch of answers that you don't know yet. So, on the one hand, we should focus on our delivery because we've all heard delivery matters more, which it does. And I'll prove this point to you right now. By the way, let's go back. Hey, listeners, if you missed the first 30 seconds of this, make sure you listen to it at some point because Andy was legitimately trying to be a bad actor. The hilarious thing is, he didn't succeed enough at it. He was trying to be really terrible at communicating and kicking off the podcast. But
Right.
if you listen closely, he has so much muscle memory of using vocal variety, of enunciating sufficiently so that you can understand his words, that even his bad acting, not terrible enough to really make the point.
That's funny.
Okay.
That's
So
funny.
that's delivery. Delivery is how you say stuff.
Mhm.
Content is what you say. And you can remember this distinction for the rest of your life because if you put your hands like you're looking through binoculars, what you're going to see, yeah, exactly, is that your left hand looks like a C and your right hand looks like the outer half of a capital D. So content is the stuff you say, delivery is how you say it. Now, we've all heard that delivery, how you say it, is more important than content. And I'm going to prove this to you again because I'm going to take your experiment from the beginning of the
Yeah.
podcast and I will go further now. Okay. I'm
Yeah.
going to say
Perfect.
two things.
Perfect.
Everybody, I want you to tell me which podcast you would continue to listen to. Here's the first one. I'm going to say something smart, by the way. Content and delivery are connected in a virtuous cycle, and the virtuous cycle is it's uh, it's actually most interesting and relevant in the direction from delivery to content. That's number one. Okay, that's the first podcast to listen to. Here's the second podcast. Blah 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 blah. Okay, so it's kind of ridiculous, of course.
Yeah.
But delivery matters a lot more than we think, and by every study ever done, it matters more, in fact, than content. But please do not get hung up on the idea of which one should I focus on.
Mhm.
The point is that you can actually use them because they unlock each other in a virtuous cycle. But now your question of why should we focus on delivery? There's a few reasons that you haven't thought of.
Mhm.
So the first is this, ask yourself this question, how much of your life have you already spent trying to improve your content? And the answer is
Mhm.
probably a lot.
Mhm.
So if you're in a professional narrative of some kind, you're in some job or some career, you've probably spent a long time trying to become better and better and better at your given job or your field or position or whatever it is, become more and more of a subject matter expert. You've probably spent not hours, not weeks, not months, but years trying to do that. So if you spend more time trying to get better at content, which you should, you will probably see some marginal improvement. Growth mindset here, folks. You're going to keep getting better. But ask yourself this, how much of your life have you actually spent on trying to get better at delivery? So if you spend just a couple hours, if you just read the book for gosh sakes, I mean,
Right.
I don't
Right.
know, many hours did it take you? 6, 8, maybe
Right.
all
Yeah.
in something like this?
Less actually.
Less. Those hours could make a massively outsized impact on all those other hours you spent trying to get better and better and better at your content. So that's one of the reasons you don't know yet. But the other, and then I'll give you a third that's probably not even on your radar. The next reason is that delivery can actually unlock a virtuous cycle in which not only do you sound better, but you actually think of smarter stuff to say. So, as an example, if listeners out there, if you learn to tolerate silence so you can do what I just did, which was take air into my body, as opposed to saying or just prattling on or speaking a mile a minute, in that time in which air entered your body, sure, you're going to have more air. So your voice sounds better afterwards and you sound more like Andy on his podcast than somebody else. So your voice will sound better. But the other thing is that your brain in that gap gets the two things it needs to think of something smart, which is time and oxygen. So it's a delivery intervention. Tolerate silence, allow for a pause. But in that moment, you actually get the thing you need to say smarter stuff. So improving your delivery will actually improve your content too. But now here's a funny third reason, and who knows how funny it will be or not. One of the littlest chapters, and I say funny because we don't know if we're going towards dystopia or but one of the shortest chapters in the whole book is when I talk about the future of delivery as it applies to AI.
Right.
So right now, AI is giving all of us the possibility of having absolutely masterful content in a moment on almost any subject in the world. But the question will be is as we get inundated with all this amazing content via generative AI and ChatGPT and other things like that, large language models, as that content factory just gets better and faster, how about delivering it well? So if you get a brilliant speech written by ChatGPT, but you can't deliver the content really well, and everyone else in the world is saying equally smart things as you are because we're all using generative AI, your delivery will probably matter a lot.
That's so good. That's so true. And here, even as I hear you talk about this, I reflect on where I'm strong and where I'm weak. But one of the reasons I drink decaf, Michael,
Mhm.
is if I drink it, I'm going to talk way too fast. And so the slow down, and you've got so many drills and exercises in the book, but one of them is the GK Lego drill. And would you at least give us an overview? People need to get the book to get the full range of what you offer, but just that one drill alone has made me think about how to pause a little bit more.
Yeah, you got it for sure. If you have Lego blocks, as Andy just teed up, they're great because they take some time to do the actual activity. But the important thing, folks, is you can use any object you want. And post-it notes work great, but other things do too. So the idea with this exercise is the following. You're not obligated to say 9 smart things. You're just obligated to say one smart thing because at the end of that smart thing, you can do, guess what? Whatever is needed to think of the next smart thought. So the way the exercise works is this. You pick up a Lego block, all right? Scatter a few on your table in front of you, 5, 7, whatever you want. Pick up the first block, but do so in absolute silence, forcing yourself to think about what do I actually want to say? Once you have the block in your hand, held aloft, you can say your first idea. But here's the key thing. You're not allowed to just blast right past the end of it and keep going into the third or fourth or fifth idea that you're trying to remember and think of all the smart stuff you say. No, you're going to put the Lego block down, but in silence. All right? Still in silence. Pick up the second block. Say your second idea. At the end of that idea, kind of like where the period might go at the end of the sentence, if we were transcribing everything you said,
Right.
you're going to put the Lego block down on the previous one and take the time to click it into place in silence. Still remain silent. Pick up the third. Say your third idea. Talk, 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 whatever it is. At the end of that idea, again, in silence, click the third block in place. And then keep going. And what you have just learned, folks, is the skill that the great impromptu speakers of all time have mastered. The reason you can see folks get up and give a 20-minute speech with no notes, almost impromptu, and they look so polished is that they have mastered this. Your brain is incredible at thinking of smart stuff and choosing smart words. It's not incredible at impromptu thinking of 1,000 smart things and choosing 1,000 smart words all at the same time. That's multitasking. Your brain can't do it actually, but your brain is incredible at unitasking. So give it the task of unitasking. Choose one idea, say that one idea, and then give yourself the ability to pause afterwards to consider what you want to say next. Now you're probably asking, okay, but why do I have to do the Lego? Why not just pause? Here's why, folks. You're not going to pause. Trust me. If I said to you, even really good coaching, which would be like at the end of every thought, what I want you to do is take a pause to consider what you're going to say next. And that pause can actually be longer than you think. Now, that's pretty good coaching on the face of it because A, it's actionable. B, it doesn't activate thought suppression. I'm not saying it don't. C, I'm not making it about you in some sort of, vague emotional quality that only gets you more focused on you and all the stuff that you are or are not. But here's the problem, it's still bad coaching. Why? Because if you never pause, if you talk very, very quickly, you have probably told yourself a thousand times, you know what? I could actually afford to pause there. I could slow down. I'm going to do that next time. You're not going to do it. So instead, pick up Lego blocks. Why? Because they create an unmistakable physical intervention that forces you to do the behavior. And then once you've done the behavior, you can repeat it and repeat it again. And then soon you've built muscle memory and you've actually acquired a skill.
It's so practical. And of course, you say in the book, in a virtual meeting, you might actually be able to use a device like that because they can't see it. But you
Yeah.
talk about an executive who, if I remember right, she would kind of press her toe down into her shoe, and that was like the click of
Yeah.
the Lego block, right? So it was like still a kinesthetic physical thing.
Yeah, that's right. I have a galley copy of the book right here because I actually use it a lot in the coaching sessions that I do. But
Yeah.
anyway, folks who are watching on video, you can see that the chapters have these tabs on the side of them.
Yeah.
And the reason that I do that is I want people to, here's a side note, a little parenthetical, people. This is the only book you'll ever hear any author talk about anywhere where I give you full permission. Don't read the whole book. Okay? Literally find out what your biggest bugaboo, your biggest frustration as a communicator is, and flip to the chapter, just like a reference book. Read that chapter. And then if you find it valuable, maybe over time go back and read other chapters too. But I want people to have this instant way to find the resource that they need. So, to your point, these chapters have these various exercises that you can flip to, and they're chock full of throughout. The Lego drill is an example of how to do that and to do that very practically so that you can actually implement that thing. And then in each chapter, yes, as you previewed there, I suggest ways to make the exercises imperceptible too. So, yeah, you could do that Lego activity in a way that no one knows you're doing it at all. But the cool thing is that this is not a life sentence. I mean, you're not gonna have to push your toe down in your shoe every single time you're in a meeting for the rest of your life. Just like anything, once you've built some muscle memory, months, not years, all of a sudden that kicks in and you've built a new habit. And then it feels a little foreign actually as you revert back to the old because you've achieved some wins and you've actually gotten better at certain things. So it feels bad to revert back to what wasn't helpful before.
Years ago, I participated in a Toastmasters program, which
Yeah.
famously includes someone that has the ah counter. And so while you're presenting, you're already succumbing to thought suppression. Don't say don't say And then when you do, you look over and you're like, X, you just know there. And so it puts more and more self focus on. And so I think I took it in the book that, yeah, let's reduce filler words, but you've got an interesting take on this that filler language is not a problem, it's a symptom. So, what do you mean by that?
Sure. People get hung up on ums and uhs. They get so hung up on it that I decided to title my book Don't Say Because why? Well, you're walking by an airport, you're looking at titles of stuff, and you see the title. You know what? I say too much. That drives me crazy. I want people to read the book and see how practical and how useful it is, and that in fact you can learn to avoid saying with this book. But I'm not the police. You don't have to eradicate it from your vocabulary. It's not a sin or something.
Uh,
Is something that we use at times fluidly. We even use it sometimes with a little degree of sophistication to indicate maybe that we're not quite done speaking or to try to claim the conversational floor. So I'm not here to try to help people eradicate ums. The reason to call the book Don't Say is number one, to bring immediate attention to how thought suppression does not help and how it's a trick. And like, wow, boy, I should give up these ridiculous don'ts that have not been helpful to me in my life. But why is filler language a symptom? Well, the problem is not the because if we make the problem, don't say all we're thinking about is the problem. There's a colleague of mine at Columbia, his name is Adam Galinsky, brilliant dude, and he studies that activity, thought suppression. And Humans are terrible at thought suppression. If you tell a bicyclist, don't hit that rock, they're actually more likely to hit the rock. So if we say, don't say we're just fixating on the ums. The is a symptom. And it's a symptom of you not being in as much command of the words that are coming out of your mouth as you could be. So instead of fixating on all the ums or the likes or the you knows or the basically kind ofs, literallys that you're trying to take out of your communication, instead, get more focused on what are all the useful, accurate, important, potent words that are surrounding that the is hiding. So try to choose those words. And even give us some math in the book to give you a little comfort about this. I'm not going to get into the kinesthetic drill for this skill, which is what I call linguistic precision, meaning are you being linguistically precise or not? Because, we can't get into every single drill in the book, but I will offer this math about it, which is this. To give you some comfort, is a single syllable. It's also the laziest syllable in the English language. All you have to do to make it is just open your mouth, and it comes flying out, like so. But it's a single syllable. All right. Now, rough math here. We speak, let's call it approximately 3 words per second, and our words average approximately 2 syllables per word. Now, that's really loose, okay? But give or take, that's 6 syllables per second. So if you say one every 5 seconds, which sounds like I'm guessing a lot, it's a high ratio, that's still only one syllable out of every 30. So the math there is a little bit more than 3% of all the sounds that you make. Now this changes because if every time you say you say it loudly, and it takes up a second, okay, it's a bigger deal, of course.
Yeah.
But still, the math of it is that it's just 3%. And I'm guessing a bunch of listeners, if you have some challenge in your life that only affects 3% of something, you might be a little kinder to yourself and embrace a little more forgiveness than how we consistently think of it. So, if you're trying to remove filler language of any kind, filler sounds, filler words from your vocabulary, the magic formula is choose the words around it, as opposed to fixating on the thing you're trying to get rid of.
And there's exercises around that I think are super helpful. But there's so many things we can talk about, but something that I personally struggle with, and I think I've chalked it up to nature, maybe nurture, but it's posture. And I found your chapter on it quite enlightening. And so I'm curious, what's typical advice about posture that's maybe wrong, and how do you like to help people improve it?
Yeah, I'll answer the question briefly. These are the wrong ones. Sit up straight, pin your shoulders back. Now, let me put the question back to you. So, you struggle with this. How have you tried in your life to adjust your posture?
Just that, like, imagine you're up against a wall, having someone give a sign, like a reminder, because we don't see ourselves. But I feel like if somebody says sit up, I feel like they're talking like a parent to a kid.
Yeah.
And so there was, I think, some natural resistance to this. But your idea in the book I've told you before we started recording, it's helped me. So how do you like to help people?
Yeah, good. Well, you hit a couple points there already. One is that sit up straight and pin your shoulders back. Neither of those are good. Here's why. First of all, in the book, I'll even have people do this exercise if they draw in what they think their spine actually looks
Mm,
like. And if you have someone draw in, well, I won't show it to you, but
yeah, yeah,
anyway, there's a blank box.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I ask readers to draw in what they think their spine looks like because it's not straight, people. It's curved. Now you know that, of course. You know the curve of your spine has these beautiful, elegant counterbalances as it goes up. The spine is not straight. So if you're trying to sit up straight, you can't actually achieve that instruction.
Mm,
But that instruction, and also the one about pinning your shoulders back, what they tend to do is they recruit a tremendous amount of muscle tension. And oftentimes you're recruiting muscles that have nothing to do actually with the balance that should be posture. So what happens? Well, when you're using muscles a lot, they get fatigued. And then over time, you get tired of that and you get discouraged and you slump because those muscles are exhausted. And so you actually sometimes rebound into worse posture than you were in before. And then you feel like, oh, I'm still failing at posture. God, I'm still bad at this. And then that feeds into the other thing you said, which is that oftentimes this does convey, or it does carry, I should say, this subtle implication of judgment. Like you
Mhm.
said, a parent telling a kid, or, an etiquette teacher kind of barking at someone. And we have this little
Right.
feeling of having committed some kind of wrong.
Right.
Now, the point is that actually posture is about balance and gravity. And so a lot of what I try to invite people to do in the book is to release a bunch of those muscles that they're working so hard and instead embrace some mantras like the following. One, a simple one, is just this: be as tall as you are. So I'm not saying be 6'2" if you're 5'11", or you could transfer it to centimeters if you use a
Right.
metric system. What I'm saying is, if you're 5'7", be 5'7". If you're 5'2", be 5'2". If you're 4'8", be 4'8", as opposed to being 2 to 3 to 4 inches shorter than that. Well, so then the question becomes how, and in the book, I walk readers through a bit of a series, but you can even do this lightning fast right now if you want to, which is either your feet or your sits bones, depending on if you're standing or sitting. Those are going to be like the tree roots of an ancient tree, a huge 200, 300-year-old tree that are just sinking and growing into the floor. But now going the other way, the counterbalance on the opposite side is that your head is a helium balloon that is lifting off the long string of your spine. Now, everybody, you've heard this before. Some of the stuff I've said so far, you've probably never heard. But this part, you've heard this many times in your life, in yoga or in meditation or martial arts. Yes, that's the point, actually, that humans use long, free, released posture because it's actually the most economical way to move, the most efficient way to move. But then chairs and other things in our society ruin that. And so we have to remind ourselves to re-find that over and over again. But let me stop talking. I want to ask you. So you said it's already been helpful to you.
Yeah.
What have you done that has been a little bit helpful in terms of posture since reading the book?
It's a great question. So here's what I do. I've heard before, like as if it's a string pulling you up. Okay, it
Yeah,
didn't help me. The
yeah,
balloon helped me because to me, the face, the head is a balloon. For some reason, the picture that works. And the side benefit of this is I feel like I'm breathing more effectively when I do that.
yeah,
So I feel like I have more energy.
yeah,
I didn't cut out the crown that you have in that section, but I feel like it's not a cockiness, it's not arrogance. It
yeah.
is. I feel more open, and so the balloon metaphor, just that, and the balance, because I tend to sway a lot, but the balance is part of it. But the helium balloon picture
Yeah.
has been transformative.
I love that. I'm so happy to hear that. Here, I'll
Uh,
give you a quiz. You tell me. We'll see how you do, okay?
yeah,
You tell me, why would allowing your head to do that, why would that allow you to breathe more freely?
yeah. Well,
What
I
do
know partly because of your book, but it it opens up the ribs. I get like the exercise you have of your back rib muscles. I think it was
you
right. Like
Yeah.
you just breathe differently. There's more room there. It's not contracted. Right?
Yes. Yes. You're acing this quiz, by the way. So
Well, I read your books.
good job reading the book. Yes, you're right. It's so obvious. There is more room. So, folks, you are a communication instrument, whether you know it or not. I referenced earlier about my father and the cello. You're a communication instrument. You have a reed, just like a clarinet or a woodwind instrument. The reed is in your throat. Those are your vocal cords. And just like that woodwind instrument, you let air flow over that. As the air does, it picks up vibration right there. And then that vibration gets amplified throughout your body and also shaped via the miraculous enunciation muscles in your mouth. It gets altered. And those muscles are like the keys on a clarinet or a woodwind instrument that shapes that sound. But the bottom of that cycle, or the bottom of your body, actually, I should say, I didn't mention your diaphragm and your guts. That's down in your tummy and also your lower back. Your diaphragm drops down to get your guts out of the way and allow your lungs to fill with air. So the diaphragm drops down, the lungs fill with air, and that's where the whole cycle begins, so that you have enough air to flow over your vocal cords. If you're slumped over all the time, and being 5'2" and instead of 5'6", when you're slumped over like that, you are robbing your body of the room that it needs for your lungs to actually expand. So when you said, "Oh wow, when I float my head like a helium balloon, all of a sudden I can breathe differently."
Mm,
Yes, because you've
absolutely.
actually gotten taller, you have created more room for your lungs to actually be able to fill with air. And that's one of these virtuous cycles that I talk about, where
Hmm.
all of a sudden posture unlocks breathing, breathing unlocks thinking time unlocks smarter stuff to say unlocks audience focus because you're actually seeing your listeners nod along and things like that. So the whole thing unlocks in this really powerful and freeing virtuous cycle.
Yeah. So true. And there's so many things, Mike, I'd love to talk with you about, but let's end with this because we have a lot of parents who listen to the podcast.
Sure.
What are some ways that you and your wife seek to help your kids become better communicators?
Sure. So the first thing, parents, is be nice to yourself. Okay. I'll tell you why. I should hire somebody to help my kids be better at speaking. And all you parents out there, you know this is a joke because the hardest thing to do is to teach our kids the skills
Right.
that we have, because sometimes you don't want to learn lessons from your parents. That cello thing that I mentioned from my dad is a perfect
Yeah.
example, by the way. A lot of the things that he explicitly tried to teach me, I just rebelled against. But
Right.
this lesson I was able to glean almost by osmosis, just by being around him, really hit home. So the first thing is be nice to yourself, okay?
That's good.
The second part, what do we try to help them do? My kids really bristle when I try to get in there and coach them specifically.
Mm.
So oftentimes I'm not giving them the kind of coaching that I would give to executives. The magnetile thing with my son was just fun. And for those of you who get the book, you'll see there's this QR code in the book, and it's an excerpt of my son speaking with an impediment, kind of like the King's Speech is the thing that
Right.
you and I were talking about,
Yeah.
Andy, that movie. But the principle of using an impediment goes all the way back to ancient Greece and an orator named Demosthenes. So anyway, we were having some fun at home using various impediments to change enunciation. So sometimes I do that sort of thing. But the one thing I do take a lot of pride with my kids that I was able to do was to get them to fall in love with story. And that's not a delivery thing, that's a content thing. Story. But we really did help them learn to love stories from a very early age. And so they had a need to be able to speak because they wanted to put ideas into story form. And that I think we did well. So what I would suggest in terms of parents who are trying to figure out how to connect with their kids, or how to support communication with their kids, three specific concepts. The first, and it's the hardest to do, truly, I also think it's the most dire, and I think it even gets less attention than it needs, and it gets a lot of attention, is these devices right here. And those who are just listening on audio, I'm holding up my cell phone. These devices right here, smartphones, are a real challenge because they're depriving our kids of some of the social educational moments that eye contact and face-to-face individual or group interaction unlocks. So, if you can put the phones away at dinner, for gosh sakes, put the phones away. Whenever you can, get the phone out of the hands so people are actually noticing the other human communication instruments around them. Do it. It is important. That's the first thing. Second thing is talk to them and share stories. And the more you do that, the more they're going to steal stuff from you. Probably not the stuff you're trying to get them to do, okay? But
Right.
they will see, okay, we're communicating now. We're doing this thing that humans have developed the ability to do that differentiates us from other life forms. And the third thing is this is the most important by far. You, parent, should take seriously your own communication improvement journey. Because if you actually demonstrate a growth mindset, if you show your kids that you can still learn and you can still try to be better, and you can in fact see that you still have some weaknesses, and lo and behold, you can still actually improve those weaknesses, whether they say so or not, they're going to see you doing that. And they're going to be inspired too, that they can improve too. So figure out, just like you did, Andy, okay,
Yeah.
you have a really wonderful, how should I frame this? You consistently speak on your podcast, and I'm changing how I'm phrasing this because it's not a state of being like, you, Andy, have a
Right.
great voice. A
Mhm,
voice is not a possession, it's not an
mhm,
object, okay?
mhm. Yeah.
You use your voice, you
Mhm,
use your physical and vocal communication instrument on this podcast very effectively to help people understand what you're saying, to stay attentive, to feel encouraged. You do that in a really sophisticated way. But you
thank
read
you.
the book and you found out, you know what? I don't use posture as much as I could. And I'm going to see if I can allow that to unlock a little bit. So, parents, I promise you, you have something as a communicator that is not as good as other aspects of your communication. Find that, figure out what it is, work on it a little bit, and set an example for your kids.
I love that. For those listening, you've just gotten such a small taste of what is in Michael's new book. If you'd like practical, I would say empowering insights and exercises on how to communicate more effectively, I highly recommend you get a copy of Michael's new book, Don't Say I consider it a must read for everyone leading teams and leading projects. I put links to the book and the book's website in the show notes for this cast. So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us on the People and Projects podcast.
That's my pleasure, Eddie. Have a great day.